This channel has just hit the 100,000 subscriber mark, and YouTube shows normally do something special to commemorate this. Most of the time, people have a face reveal and then have the audience ask them questions. However, we already do that every month here, and so that wouldn't be very special. As all the fans of this show know, I'm sort of obsessed with maps, and I love to make them in my spare time. Because of this, I have loads of pretty good maps locked onto my computer that don't really see the light of day. So, to celebrate this occasion, I thought we could have a special video where I look at the 12 best maps that I've made and talk about them. Obviously, these maps lean more towards my personal historic specialities, but there's something for every nerd here, so with that out of the way, let's start. As you can probably tell, I really love my maps and I wouldn't want any danger to come to them. For that reason, I use NordVPN to protect them from hackers and other such types who want to steal my, of course, priceless maps. They sell VPNs that can reroute your location to over 60 countries, including Thailand, the United Kingdom, Russia, or Costa Rica. Recommended by PC Mag and VPN Mentor, they have very fast servers that protect your data, especially in public locations where they're most threatened in areas like airports or cafes, with double encryption so you're sure to be safe. It works on most operating systems like Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. Check out NordVPN now by clicking the link in the description and use the promo code WhatIfAltHist for 68% off a 2-year plan plus 1 month free. Start protecting your information with NordVPN today. The first is a lingual map of the world, and I made this when I realized no one had made a map of the dominant languages around the world, and I quickly realized why. Africa and Oceania were brutal. I wasted what felt like a week on Cameroon and Papua New Guinea, who alone has more than 500 languages. The big thing you immediately notice is that languages trail empires. The Spanish, Arabic, and Russian empires are all immediately apparent. You can clearly see which areas have had a long history of long-distance trade and nation-building, between the relatively clean borders across most of Europe and Asia to the tiny, incomprehensible borders of most of the tropics. It's hard to imagine, but the whole world used to be as lingually divided as Africa or Borneo are today. A way this map is somewhat deceptive is that if you look at regions like Canada, Brazil, Australia, or Russia, you would think the native languages would make up a majority of the speakers, but that's not the case. The numbers are normally beneath 5% of the total population. This is since the native populations in these regions occupy vast but very lightly settled regions. Similarly, I wouldn't trust the borders in the tropics too well. The information is too hazy and I did try my best, but there's still probably mistakes. In a similar vein, this is an ethnic map of the world before World War I. Rather than following culture or language, this is based off blood, following 23andMe rules by which where your ancestors lived 500 years ago determines your ethnicity. Again, Oceania and Africa are borderline incomprehensible. You also run into the complication where ethnic groups can often have little in common genetically. This is true with Arabs, but since the Arabs viewed themselves as a coherent ethnic group 500 years ago, they're going to be counted as such. Again, ethnicity is always a rough subject that's controversial. Before World War I, Serbs and Bosnians or Ukrainians and Belarusians viewed themselves as the same ethnic group but have since divided in the last 100 years. The New World, where people are of mostly mixed ancestry, gets very complicated. This creates complications especially in South America, where the line between someone who's 45% European and 55% native and vice versa is in real terms pretty slim, but is manifest on this map. By the way, figuring out the names of tribes in South America that were wiped out in the 16th century was hard to say the least. This map is effectively the same thing but with an intensified focus in the United States. The issue with America is that most Americans, including myself, are of mixed ancestry, and so parceling out which group is plurality is difficult. This makes census results on how people self-identify ancestrally ridiculously bad and inaccurate. Some things might surprise you about this map. First is that English, not German Americans, are by far the largest group, with, from looking at genetic, last name, and census data, are ridiculously undercounted by the census. This map might overemphasize the English hegemony, since in basically any well-mixed area, the English are going to carry a slight plurality. Similarly, Northern Protestant Irish is one of the largest ancestral groups in America, but has basically no cultural representation since their culture just became American culture. African Americans are in real terms a very mixed group, but in the Chesapeake they came mostly from Nigeria and in the Deep South from Angola and the Congo. A large amount of Nigerian-descended Africans migrated to the Deep South in the 19th century, but I didn't think it was enough to unseat the Angolan plurality. You also get weird isolated hubs of groups like Scandinavians, Finns, and Dutch in the Midwest for a variety of historic reasons that I don't have the time to get into here. Similarly, much to the chagrin of racists, your average Hispanic American is 2/3 European ancestry. One thought experiment I was working with was what an Anglo-America would look like with medieval technology. This is a conclusion I came to. This is a political map that just looks at bureaucratic states. You have to remember that organized states could only thrive with medieval technology under certain geographic conditions most of America does not have. Very populous regions like the Southwest, Texas, or Florida would be unable to have urban life for geographic reasons. The wealthiest and most organized states would be those of the Great Lakes region, who would be able to have fertile soil, a temperate climate, water transportation, and geographically definable borders. This is a cultural map of the same thought experiment, showing the various lifestyles of the peoples involved. Again, much of the West could only be survivable with herding lifestyles, while the temperate forest regions would have a culture much closer to what Europe had in our world. The Great Plains would be inhabited by Mongol-like nomadic tribes. Appalachia and East Texas would be inhabited by forest tribes like the Scots, Irish, or Lithuanians, while areas like New Mexico and Utah would have Middle East-style irrigation societies. I've been considering making a video on this topic for years. Would you guys be interested? This is a simplified climate map of the world I made. It's based off the Köppen model, but I changed several things to make it more accessible to the layman and more useful for historical analysis. I merged around 4 oceanic climate zones that seemed to be the same thing to me, and I made a very temperate zone out of it, and I gave layman's terms for each of these geographic regions. You can effectively tell which areas have big mountain ranges just based off how messed up and scrabbled their climates are. Again, these designations aren't perfect. The cold steppe region is often warmer than the subtropical regions, but it's doing the best it can. This is for a video I'm planning on making at some point about how climate affects history. This is another geographic map I made in a somewhat similar vein. This is caused by me seeing the same geographic regions be used again and again, while most of the world remains pretty useless and underpopulated. This is a map where I effectively removed all the wastelands, or areas useless for state formation. Areas like mountains, deserts, thick jungles, Arctic tundras, etc. are treated like oceans, because for the purposes of organized states, they are. What's left is the areas that empires can be based out of. Switzerland is a perfectly stable state, but the Alps have historically formed a pretty big barrier to empire building, and a Swiss state could never be a great empire conquering the surrounding areas. Similarly, far eastern Siberia has a climate that could create an empire, but the Russians totally wasted this opportunity. The areas that are left on the map are those that allow arable agriculture and are flat enough to form a state off. There are clear delineations between these areas left. There are firstly the tropics, where states can form, but disease and often poor soils will form a barrier. The red are areas where one must worry about disease. The yellow are the temperate regions with dry and warm climates. Then there's the warm, cool, temperate areas in green. The orange is the grassland regions, where until gunpowder, they formed horseback barbarian tribes that continually poured forth to make hay for the developed societies. After gunpowder, they often became very fertile areas in the breadbaskets of the world. This is a map to effectively counter what I call risk-like thinking. You see lots of alternate historians unite South America on a whim, but that's dumb since South America is effectively 4 different continents split by geography in real terms. This is a pretty similar thing, but it's a strategic map of the world. The world's divided on a geographic basis, with the regions with similar geography put together. On every continent, the top 5 most strategic points are marked. The blue circles are river valley regions, or areas that would be desert except for a river system that lets them have an organized, developed civilization. This map came from my readings of history, where you'll see similar regions get fought over again and again and again. This map is meant to simulate those conflicts, showing why Northern Europe is constantly being fought over, being a flat plain surrounded by other geographically distinct areas, or why China's isolationist, being surrounded by regions with incompatible geography. This map means to exist to show which countries are in advantageous positions and where conflicts have and will continue to happen. This is a map of how many times various countries in the world have been invaded. The highest country in the world is Syria with 39 invasions, followed by Turkey with 32. The lowest are Iceland and Fiji, both of which have been militarily occupied but never invaded. This map is biased towards countries with long histories, in that we only have 100 years of records in much of sub-Saharan Africa, and so the numbers are lower there, while in the Middle East you can go back thousands of years. This one's pretty straightforward. This is a map of the last time your country was militarily occupied and who did it. This counts military occupations the populations wanted, like how the US liberated Western Europe from the Nazis. And as you can see, a couple countries take quite a bit of a lead. Surprisingly, in Latin America, imperialism is often done by local powers themselves, with Colombia and Argentina trying and failing to exert influence over their neighboring countries. Something it shows is that most countries have been occupied by a foreign country quite recently, and those that haven't stick out like sore thumbs. I've effectively found that practically every country in the world can trace their heritage and origin to one of 10 events that happened in history. These countries share common traits and cultural characteristics and often have shared identities, and this is a map of what I think they are. These historic events were the spread of Buddhism and Hinduism out of India, the Chinese Empire, the Roman Empire, the Bantu, Germanic, and Slavic migrations, and these were followed by the Islamic Caliphate and Turkic migrations. In the modern era were the conquistadors and the British diaspora. This is a really rich topic that I don't have the time to get into now. If we're talking about origins, genetics is wrecking our assumptions about where we came from. Genetics has shown in recent years that massive migrations occurred in prehistory, especially around the invention of agriculture. This is a map of where the origin of a majority of today's population's ancestors came from 15,000 years ago. Large migrations originated in modern Kurdistan or eastern Turkey that spread agriculture west into Europe and east into India, with the Iberians taking these genes into the Americas. The Bantus, starting in Nigeria, spread into most of Africa, replacing the native population, followed by slavery spreading their genes around the world. The ancestors of the Polynesians and Indonesians came from Taiwan, while most of East Asia's ancestors came from either the Yangtze or Yellow Rivers and spread out with agriculture. The Indo-European herders from southern Russia became dominant in northern Europe, its colonial territories, and parts of India. Meanwhile, the Turkic migrations also spread across Central Asia. Similar migrations spread with milk consumption and herding across Africa, starting in Egypt and around Lake Chad. The black areas are those where the inhabitants were the same as 15,000 years ago. This is a map I've shown several times before, but the font was always too small for people to read. Here, we've zoomed in. This is a cheery subject, and it covers where possible conflicts can take place in the 2020s, and I've covered a lot of this in my Wars of the 2020s video, in which I talk at length about these conflicts. In general, this shows the two main alliance networks of the world today, one American-based and the other Chinese. This shows the possible hotspots of the current world. China and Asia as a whole are hotspots, and I stand by Central Asia as a major worry. Some of this I didn't cover in the video. South Africa and Indonesia are possibly worrying areas, and I also cover conflicts that are still occurring in real time, like the French anti-terrorist wars in the Sahel and the Second Congo War. So I hope you guys enjoyed that content. As always, thank you very much for watching and have a great day. Or alternatively, check me out at Patreon, where I've got all sorts of cool maps and the first couple chapters of my history of the world. Or alternatively, check me out at Twitter. As always, thank you very much for watching and have a great day.